Good morning with your major newscast. I am Jessica Daw. First with the highlights. APNU plus AFC parliamentarians disrupted yesterday's parliamentary sitting but failed to block the passage of the controversial Natural Resource Fund legislation. The opposition coalition is concerned that the local content legislation may be in violation of the CARICOM Treaty of Chaguaramas. The Caribbean Court of Justice has ruled that a road contract that had been awarded to Chunilal Babulal is illegal. In the region, 2 persons have been killed as police battle several armed robbers in Suriname. And internationally, environmental experts say that storms such as hurricanes will be much more devastating. The details of these stories and more in just a moment.
Advertise with us on News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM for best coverage on programs on motivation, beauty and health, parenting and relationships, knowing your rights, and a variety of enlightening content, and get value for your money. Call our helpful staff today on 223-1056 or 223-1041 today.
Now for the news in detail. Pandemonium broke out in the National Assembly last night when opposition, a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change, APNU plus AFC parliamentarians sought to derail passage of new Natural Resource Fund legislation. The opposition says that the new law puts control of the fund in a board that will be handpicked by the president. On top of that, the opposition says that a 22-member parliamentary oversight committee has been reduced to 9 persons. APNU plus AFC, as well as the 5 civil society organizations, say that the formula for withdrawing monies gives government too much power to abuse and squander Guyana's oil wealth. It all started when Opposition Chief Whip Christopher Jones asked House Speaker Mansour Nadir to push back debate on the new law to govern spending of the oil revenues.
Comrade Speaker, I believe that this bill is beyond us in this House. It speaks about the future of this country, the generation.
Thank you,
With that, Comrade Speaker, we ask that this bill be sent a special select committee.
The Speaker's refusal almost immediately triggered the thumping of the tables by opposition lawmakers.
The standing orders go. I must now call on the Honorable Minister to move that the bill be read a second time. Honorable Minister, Senior Minister in the Office
Mr.
of the
Speaker, we
President,
stand in objection to that bill.
Responsibility for finance.
The Speaker was forced to suspend the debate after the opposition parliamentarians left their seats, walked around, chanted, and blew whistles a few inches away from Dr. Singh as he was speaking. The situation did not improve when they returned as a defiant House Speaker allowed a determined Finance Minister to deliver his presentation on the bill. There were more chants, and eventually opposition parliamentarians were seen snatching the mace and taking it outside of the chamber.
And so we are witnessing now unprecedented vulgarity in the National Assembly of Guyana, consistent with the vulgarity of the Natural Resource Fund Act that the then APNU-AFC government
One second, Honorable Member. Hold 1 second.
The mace, the symbol of the Speaker's authority, was returned and placed again in front of Mr. Nadir just in time for the Finance Minister to wrap up debate and the Governance and Parliamentary Affairs Minister to put the bill to a vote. In related news, the opposition, a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change, APNU plus AFC, says that the new Natural Resources Fund legislation was not properly passed. Shadow Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs Roysdale Ford says this is because parliamentary procedures were violated.
The Natural Resource Fund Bill number 20 of 2021 was not legally passed in the National Assembly. First, the mace, which is the symbol of authority, which must be present throughout the deliberations and sittings of the National Assembly when a law is to be passed, was not present. Secondly, the standing orders state that a member of the National Assembly must be in his or her seat to vote in the National Assembly. Most of the government MPs and members of Parliament were out of their seats, especially the Prime Minister, who was on his feet, waving. It is clear that there was no legal vote carried tonight in the National Assembly. Clearly, all of the aforesaid circumstances render the passage of this bill null and void and of no legal effect.
Parliamentary video recordings show that the mace was returned and again placed before the House Speaker before Governance and Parliamentary Affairs Minister Gil Teixeira put the Natural Resource Fund Act to the vote. APNU plus AFC made no mention of the role of its parliamentarians in removing the mace. House Speaker Manzoor Nadir did not say what action he will take against those parliamentarians, but he noted that a number of persons had disconnected microphones and the internet. Government and the opposition on Wednesday traded concerns about amendments and omissions in the local content legislation. The bill provides for oil companies, contractors, and subcontractors to bid for the provision of goods and services. Minister of Natural Resources Vikram Bharat says that 10 of the 14 proposed amendments to the local content legislation have been accepted. He says these include the establishment of a local content advisory committee with representatives from the opposition, Bar Association, private sector, and the National Tushaus Council. Shadow Minister of Natural Resources David Patterson, however, says that the government has knocked out the opposition's proposal for the Guyana Association of Professional Engineers and Transparency Institute of Guyana to be included. Mr. Barrett notes that the local content legislation provides for annual reviews of the master plans of international oil companies, contractors, and subcontractors. The minister says the annual reviews will allow the government to have a clearer understanding of the human resource and technical capacity of companies between now and December 2022.
A bill instituted an act to provide for the implementation of local content obligations on persons engaged in the petroleum operations or related activities in the petroleum sector. To prioritize Guyanese nationals and Guyanese businesses in the procurement of goods and services for the enhancement of the value chain of the petroleum sector. To enable local capacity development, to provide for the investigation, supervision, coordination, monitoring, and evaluation of and participation in local content in Guyana. To promote competitiveness and encourage the creation of related industries that will sustain the social and economic development of Guyana.
Mr. Patterson says that while the bill was tabled in the National Assembly on December 16, the opposition was invited by the government at 9:30 that morning to consultations. Mr. Patterson notes that the Private Sector Commission was consulted long before, although the parliamentary opposition represents more than 200,000 persons. Despite impassionate appeals by the opposition, a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change, the government refused to send the local content bill to a bipartisan select committee for further consideration and amendments. AFC leader Kemraj Ramjatan.
Indeed, we are urging, Mr. Speaker, that this bill be sent to a select committee for further perfections and explanations in relation to a lot of things that we find that is not in it, and which obviously would require some expert advice to at least fill up so that we can still have a better bill. 1 month is not too long a period of time for us to report back to you with the bill.
But Natural Resources Minister Barrett says the government is wary about the legislation getting stuck in a select committee.
We don't trust the opposition when it comes to sending bills to a special select committee. Mr. Speaker, the local content bill is a working document. It is a living document. Nothing is stopping the opposition from making submissions from us. We will continue the consultation after this bill is passed in the National Assembly. This is not the end of it, Mr. Speaker, because we have committed ourselves to changing the schedule from time to time based on our capacity.
He says the local content legislation will be constantly reviewed and the list of categories of businesses will be updated based on ongoing consultations and capacity assessment. Opposition Shadow Minister of Natural Resources David Patterson fears that the local content legislation violates the CARICOM Treaty of Chaguaramas. He made the observation during debate on the local content bill against the backdrop of the CARICOM Treaty, providing for the rights of establishment and free movement of labor and capital across the regional single market.
Mr. Speaker, we have concerns and require clarification and confirmation from the government that this bill will not conflict with other international treaties. Guyana is a signatory to the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, sir, and Article 7 of that treaty, non-discrimination, states, and I hope colleagues will expand on specific areas of concern during their presentation. Sir, the first issue we have a concern with is CARICOM. Mr. Speaker, we have concerns and require clarification and confirmation from the government that this bill will not conflict with other international treaties.
But Attorney General Anil Nandalal says that Suriname and Trinidad and Tobago have local content policies that have not been challenged under the treaty. He says Guyana will address that concern if it arises.
It's not that we didn't address our minds to this, sir. We have addressed our minds to it, and when the issue arises, we will deal with it. We will deal with it. So you have the government's assurance that we have addressed that issue and we will deal with it at the appropriate time.
Trinidad and Tobago's Energy Minister Stuart Young is on record on a number of occasions as saying that his country is ready to assist Guyana in the development of its oil and gas sector. The local content bill provides for the employment and contracting of Guyanese. The Caribbean Court of Justice, CCJ, says the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission, GGMC, is a procurement entity that falls under the Procurement Act. This finding was made in a judgment that found that the GGMC's decision to award the Arimu Road Rehabilitation Contract to Chunilal Babulal was unlawful. The CCJ says that the GGMC contracted Chunilal Babulal's CBR mining in June 2013, although certain important information had been lacking from that company's bid. McDC Mining Company and BK International had submitted the lowest bid. While the GGMC had argued in the Guyana High Court that it was a private body in law, that court had disagreed, holding that GGMC was a public agency under the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment. GGMC and Babulal appealed this decision to the Court of Appeal, but that court agreed with the High Court and dismissed the appeal. GGMC and Babulal subsequently appealed to the CCJ, which found that the GGMC was a government agency because of the public nature of its functions, the extensive ministerial control exercisable over it, and the sources of its funding included inflows from the government. The CCJ says that as an agency of the government, GGMC fell under the definition of a procuring entity in the Procurement Act and therefore had an obligation to conduct bidding according to that act. The regional court says that judicial review was available to BK because GGMC was conducting a public function, that is, a road rehabilitation project, where the funding came from the government. Further, the CCJ considered that BK had a legitimate expectation that GGMC would comply with the Procurement Act. The CCJ says there were several instances where the GGMC had not adhered to the Procurement Act. For example, the rejection of BK's bid was not done in accordance with the Procurement Act. Additionally, there was no proof of how CB&R or any of the bidders, for that matter, were pre-qualified. Health Minister Dr. Frank Anthony is warning Guyanese to take booster shots against the COVID-19 virus because Omicron can reinfect persons or those who have already received 2 shots.
With Omicron, you can get reinfected. Even if you had COVID before, this particular variant can reinfect you. And that is why we have been advocating to people, even if you had 2 doses of the vaccine, go and get a 3rd dose or a booster dose, because with booster doses, you are going to get protection. So if you have become eligible for that booster, meaning that you're 6 months after your last vaccination, go and get the booster dose, because after 6 months, after your 2nd dose, we would have seen that immunity starts weaning, meaning that you will have less antibodies.
Although the number of new cases over any 24-hour period has dropped, Dr. Anthony says that may not mean that actual figures are on the decline.
I really want to urge people not to be complacent, because a lot of times people tend to be very complacent. They feel because the numbers are dropping that, we are over the pandemic. We are not over as yet. We are a long way from being over, and we really need to take all the precautions.
The Health Ministry says that 87 new cases have been recorded within the past 24 hours. The death of a 65-year-old woman who was not vaccinated has pushed Guyana's death toll to 1,051. The Health Ministry says the woman is from Region 1. Of the 33 persons who are hospitalized, 6 are very ill and are receiving intensive care. There are now 604 persons who have been told by doctors to isolate themselves at home so that they do not spread the virus. 6 persons have been quarantined to see if they will develop COVID-19 symptoms. Now for the news in the region. The Grenada Police Force says it will have to make tough decisions as many of its law enforcement personnel are being afflicted by the coronavirus COVID-19. More in this report from the Grenada Broadcasting Network, GBN.
Commissioner Martin says some 600 officers are vaccinated. He expressed concern after more than 200 police officers contracted COVID-19, with many placed in isolation and 2 recorded deaths during the country's community spread of the virus.
It's causing a strain on the organization in terms of having to float vaccinated officers to areas that requires that emphasis. Quite frankly, I do not know how long, and as we move more to different establishes, businesses and organizations requiring vaccination, the mere fact that this exists, it pressures the organization more to have higher levels of vaccination in the force.
The COP said high levels of infection within the force brought the RGPF to a tipping point where the force could have come into question to be able to deliver effectively its mission and mandate in keeping the people and the country safe.
We cannot go back in that area. It means, therefore, that the leadership of the force has to make some decisive decisions to avert us reverting into this kind of possibilities into the future.
Grenada's Police Commissioner Edwin Martin ending that report from Grenada Broadcasting Network. Several units of the Surinamese police force were yesterday deployed to an area of the country where there has been a sudden upsurge in shootings. Star News reports that 2 persons have been shot dead so far at a location named Reddy Dotty. Authorities say that the situation has gotten quite out of hand. Earlier in the day, 1 person was shot and killed, and 2 others were injured. Police say several robberies have been committed by 5 to 10 persons. The situation is not yet under control. The suspects are armed with shotguns, pistols, and revolvers. A boat from Trinidad and Tobago that illegally transported a number of Venezuelans to their country has been missing since December 23. Trinidad Newsday reports that Venezuelan authorities confirmed the information on Monday. The boat Amaya was manned by a Trinidadian crew. Gilberto Pinto, governor of Sucre State, Venezuela, said on Monday the missing vessel entered Venezuelan waters without authorization. The boat left Trinidad and headed to Guadilla coast. Relatives in Venezuela told local media 9 or 10 people were traveling on the boat. The missing people who were aboard Amaya include a child and the crew. The Venezuelan Coast Guard found a boat floating in international waters, so a search and rescue mission was activated. It is unknown whether the boat is the Amaya. Meanwhile, Venezuelan Attorney General Tariq William Saab said on Monday that a group of 4 Venezuelans was detained and charged with illegal trafficking of people from Venezuela to Trinidad and Tobago. The Venezuelan prosecutor's office will charge them with the crimes of illegal trafficking in persons, criminal association, financing of terrorism, and the trafficking of children and adolescents. And lastly, in the region, St. Vincent and the Grenadines recorded its first case of the Omicron variant of the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic. Authorities say the person is a fully vaccinated adult United States traveler who tested positive for the virus. The Caribbean Media Corporation reports that the National Emergency Management Organization, NEMO, said the unnamed traveler who had a negative COVID-19 test result had been subjected to further testing on arrival. NEMO said that the island had recorded 3 new COVID-19 positive cases on Monday from 74 samples collected on December 24, resulting in a positivity of 4.1%. And here now is your international news coming from the BBC.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. The former president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, says his decision to flee the country in August was made within minutes of his security forces telling him they could no longer protect him or the capital, as the Taliban had broken a commitment not to enter Kabul. Mr. Ghani, who's now in exile in the UAE, told the BBC the decision to leave in the way he did was extremely difficult.
It's the hardest thing. And because of that, for the past 100 days, I've been writing, I've been alone, I've been reflecting. There couldn't be a harder thing. I had to sacrifice myself in order to save Kabul and to expose the situation for what it is. A violent coup, not a political agreement or a political process where the people have been involved.
Police in Hong Kong have formally pressed charges against 2 journalists who worked for Stand News, the online media outlet that announced its closure on Wednesday after a police raid. They're accused of sedition. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has condemned the authorities in China and Hong Kong for forcing the shutdown of one of the territory's last remaining pro-democracy publications. But Hong Kong's chief executive, Carrie Lam, insisted police actions had done nothing to do with silencing independent media.
These actions are law enforcement actions. These actions have nothing to do with so-called suppression of press freedom or suppression of democracy, as some will put it. So I would say that nobody should associate law enforcement actions by the police department with the freedom of the press.
Australia's former federal parliament building in the capital Canberra has been set alight during a demonstration by supporters of Aboriginal sovereignty. The fire was quickly extinguished and no casualties were reported. Shaima Khalil reports.
Workers inside Old Parliament House were evacuated when the fire broke out. In a video, a group of people are seen clapping, with the entrance engulfed in flames. Government officials condemned the incident, with several describing it as an attack on democracy. The Heritage Building, which currently houses the Museum of Australian Democracy, was forced to shut last week when a group of people started a ceremonial fire next to the doors. An investigation into the cause of the fire is underway.
The body of Desmond Tutu, the South African Archbishop and anti-apartheid campaigner who died last Sunday, is lying in state at St George's Anglican Cathedral in Cape Town. People are filing past to pay their final respects. His official funeral is on New Year's Day when he'll be cremated. World News from the BBC. Presidents Biden and Putin are to hold another phone call later today as the US tries to build a common response with Europe to Russia's massing of troops on the Ukrainian border. A senior Biden administration official said the 2 men would discuss a range of security and strategic issues. The British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell has been convicted of trafficking underage girls for sexual abuse by the late US financier Jeffrey Epstein. A jury in New York found the 60-year-old guilty on 5 out of 6 charges connected with procuring the victims and facilitating the abuse. One of her accusers, Annie Farmer, said Maxwell engaged in predatory behaviour for years. Lisa Bloom, a lawyer who's represented 8 women who say they were abused by Jeffrey Epstein, welcomed the verdict.
There's no question that in our criminal justice system, having money and power is a huge advantage. And I'm not going to be Pollyanna-ish and say, this just goes to show no matter how much money you have, you're always going to be brought to justice. Because, of course, that's not true. Ghislaine Maxwell has walked free on this earth for 60 years. I hope she never has a day of freedom the rest of her life for what she's done to so many women and girls.
Maxwell's lawyer says she will appeal. The car maker Citroën has withdrawn a commercial in Egypt that's been accused of encouraging harassment of women. The clip features the Egyptian star Oumar Diab taking a picture of a young woman passing in front of his car from an inbuilt camera in the Citroën C4 he's driving. Citroën has apologised. Scientists are attempting to get the James Webb Orbiting Telescope up and running. The world's most powerful telescope was launched on Christmas Day. Over the next few days, scientists will attempt to unpack its giant sunshield, Without it, the telescope won't be able to capture images of the first stars to shine in the universe. BBC News.
And that was your international news. Here now is a recap of the highlights. APNU plus AFC parliamentarians disrupted yesterday's parliamentary sitting but failed to block the passage of the controversial Natural Resource Fund legislation. The opposition coalition is concerned that the local content legislation may be in violation of the CARICOM Treaty of Chaguaramas. The Caribbean Court of Justice has ruled that a road contract that had been awarded to Chunilal Babulal is illegal. In the region, 2 persons have been killed as police battle several armed robbers in Suriname. And internationally, environmental experts say that storms such as hurricanes will be much more devastating. And that was your major newscast. I am Jessica Daw.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.